In this video, we're going to have a look at how you can create user accounts within Gearlog, set their permissions, and also control permissions for whole groups of users at once using the idea of user groups. Let's begin by having a look at some user accounts and then move on to looking at user groups. To access your user accounts, it's settings and then user accounts. You'll notice below that user groups as well that we'll return to shortly. Let's add a user to get a general sense of how they work, but let's also note that when you have a large number of users, you can use the filter panel up at the top to control how many of your users you see on the screen at once. For example, search for a particular user's name, search for part of their organisation name, see our other video on working with organisations in Gearlog, and also scope yourself down to just users at a particular site. Note as well, it's generally good practice in Gearlog not to delete your user accounts because you'd be deleting the association between those users and any inspections they've done. It's better to mark users as inactive and then use this filter panel to show those inactive users if you need to go back to them again in the future. Let's add a user to get started, having looked at that filter panel. When we add a user, the first question it will ask us is whether we're going to add a power user or a normal user. Power users have more control out of the box and normal users have less, and that's a sliding scale for each of those that you can then adjust. Let's start by looking at the power user options and then flip over and look at the normal user options. So taking a power user first, as we start to add an account, let's work through each of these options one at a time so you understand them. First of all, would you like the account to be active? We want this user to be able to log in, so for now we'll leave that one set to yes. Enter their personal details. We'll just use some dummy data for now. The system will automatically generate a unique username for them. You can adjust that username yourself if you want, provided it's not been taken by anybody else on the Gearlog platform. Enter an email address. We'll use that email address to keep in touch with this person in the future in terms of their gear alerts and also to let them know their account has been created. If you wish, enter a phone number. That's completely optional for them and is only for your own records. We won't use that phone number. Set an initial password for the user, and of course at a later date they can change the password themselves or also reset it if they happen to forget it. We're going to talk more about user groups at the end of this. That's a way of setting a user's permissions at the group level rather than individually. We'll leave that one blank for now. If your user works at a particular location, then you can select that location for them. And if you would only like them to be able to see equipment at that location, for example, that's the only place they work and other sites within your organisation are irrelevant, then you can set that to no. And now they will only be able to see equipment at that particular site. To be able to see all the equipment across the whole of your organisation, leave that one set to yes. If you would like to limit the documents that they can see our video on document management, then you can select a particular folder for them to work in as their home folder and then also decide whether they can see other folders or only that home folder. Exact counterpart to how sites work. You're just selecting a normal folder for them and then also choosing if they can jump to other folders. If you'd like them to be able to create sites underneath their primary site, for example, if they're the manager at that site, they might want to be able to create rooms and lockers, then you can enable this option for them here. See our video on settings, sites for more information on using sites within Gearlog. If you're using our organisation tool, there's a video on that for you to have a look at. You can select their primary organisation at this point and decide, as mentioned in our training video on organisations, whether that will limit the equipment that they can see to only equipment inside that organisation. If you would like your users to only be able to create lists which are temporary and will be deleted after a certain period, then you can use the setting here to do that. See our video on gear lists for more information on that one. And if this person is a member of staff, as opposed to, for example, an external contractor or a guest, then you can use this setting here as well. When we follow for this power user with a couple of options, should they be allowed to delete information from the platform? The default for this, of course, is no. You can change that to yes, but do be aware that deleting equipment is permanent and it's generally best to restrict this option to only a small number of users or perhaps only your admin account. Scrolling down a little bit further, to the account tools, we have a couple of options here which enable us to control what equipment users can see. So specifically, if we say a user can only see certain lists, this will then limit the equipment that they can see to equipment on that lists. With a second backup option that says they're limited in terms of what they see, but if they do scan a QR code or barcode on it, they can bypass that limit. Those are two fairly sophisticated settings, and do feel free to reach out to us if you would like some more information on those. Down below, some more settings that they can access. Should they be allowed to import from spreadsheets into the platform, and should they be allowed to export? Make a decision there on whether this power user should be allowed access to import and exports. And then some other settings that we can follow on to have a look through below. Should they be able to access restricted folders? If you've seen our documentation management video, you'll know that you can set some folders as being restricted, in which case documents in them can only be seen by users with this setting set to yes. If you'd like this user to be able to take charge of managing their own qualifications, see our video on that topic, then setting this one to yes will allow them to take control of managing their qualifications. Leaving it as no will require a user to do their qualification management for them. If you would like them to be able to record inspections for other users, i.e. to note that somebody else did an inspection they're recording, you can change this to yes. Leaving it as no mean they can only record inspections under their own names. If this person has some kind of an HR or management type role and you would like them to be able to manage other users, so create user accounts and, more importantly, manage their qualifications, then this option should be set to yes. If you would like people to be able to change the default next inspection dates that pop up on equipment when they're doing inspections, then this option will let you choose between that. Leaving it as no will force them to accept the default next inspection date. Setting it to yes will give them a default date but allow them to change it. And similarly with loan return dates, should they be able to specify their own return date for equipment, or should it be forced to the default? One final filter setting, quite useful. When you have a number of lists in the platform, users can be intimidated by the number of lists they see, and there is a filter on that list page to only show the lists that they've created. Here on their user account, you can decide the default setting for that filter. Should the default for them be only lists that they've created, or should it be all the lists that they have access to? Below that, you also have the option finally on a power user to specify any particular statuses of equipment that you don't want users to be able to see, this user to be able to see. For example, you could turn off the ability to see items which are for sale. Last option, would you like this user to get a welcome email when you save them? If set to no, they won't be aware that you've created an account until you tell them. If set to yes, they'll get an alert letting them know that an account has been created for them. What would be different if we change this person to a normal user, a lower privileged user by default? So switching down to normal users, the top section remains exactly the same. You're going to put some personal information in for them. Following down from that, again, the next sections look very similar. Choose their site, choose their folder, choose their primary organisation, decide on whether they can create temporary lists, and if they're a member of staff. The next section for normal users, however, looks quite different. Out of the box, power users, as the one we just looked at, can do everything. For a normal user, we get to decide what will be available for them when managing equipment. For example, you may say this user is allowed to do inspections, and they're allowed to do testing, and they're allowed to record usage, but we don't want them to have anything to do with loans, returns, or reservations. So you can turn on and off some of the features of the platform at the user account level using that setting. Then under the account tools, a power user, as we just looked at, has access to all tools in the platform by default. Normal users, we can specify exactly which tools they should see. For example, do we want them to access the list tool? Do we want them to access the dashboard, scanner? You make a choice as to what parts of the platform your users want to see. And then scrolling down, as before, import and export are choices you can make for a normal user as well as for power users. And then a few more settings down underneath here, which also we saw when we were looking at power users, that you can enable for normal users as well. So, for example, should they be able to manage their qualifications? should they be able to manage other users. So that section, the same as for power users. And again at the end, also the same, what statuses of equipment they should be able to manage. So the main difference there between normal and power users is power users can use all of the tools within the platform and all of the functions on managing equipment. Normal users, you can make a decision as to which of those they should have. That takes us through looking at the options on adding user accounts. Let's just talk briefly about user groups so you understand the function of those as well. On the settings menu, we have the option to create user groups. A user group is simply a collection of users who will be given the same privileges. When adding a user to the user group to the platform, this screen will now be quite familiar to you, as it contains all of the options that we were looking at when we were looking at user accounts specifically. We can then set these up as a template, as a user group, and any user that we then add to their group will inherit their permissions from the user group, rather than you having to set them manually on every user. That can be very useful when you have large numbers of users with similar permissions on the platform. Hopefully that video has been useful and has given you an overview of how you can extend access to your inventory by creating user accounts, how you can control their access, and how you can organise them into user groups, which make it simpler to set up permissions. Any questions on user groups, as normal, just reach out to us, info@gearlog.org.